I'm George Galloway, and I present كلمة on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing events in the Gulf which appear to have taken a grave turn. I'm joined here in the studio in London by an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. By the time you see this program, the Gulf may be consumed in yet another war, and between two rather unexpected belligerents. Both of them, to an extent or other, desert despotisms, ruled by ruling families, both of them picked by Great Britain and other imperialist powers, both of them armed to the teeth, more than the teeth actually. They would have to have 1,000 teeth for that metaphor to be entirely accurate. Both of them hosting significant US military presences and many other countries interfering in their internal affairs also. I refer, of course, to the war which might, by the time you watch this, already have begun between Saudi Arabia and its own, in turn, satrapies, satellite desert emirates and kingdoms, and the kingdom of Qatar. Now, the causes of this conflict are just a little bit complicated for Western audiences, but probably not all that complicated for you. Here's my take on what lies behind it. The proximate causes, which are encompassed in the 13-point ultimatum issued by the so-called GCC, led by Saudi Arabia, are this: that Qatar must cease and desist from having its own foreign policy, and that its foreign policy must be subjugated to the overarching foreign policy of the GCC. That Al Jazeera television, which has become one of the most famous Arab institutions in the wider world, must be closed down. Not just its Arabic section, but its English section also. Now, this is a TV station with 60 bureaus across the world, in which most powerful and influential people in the countries that these bureaus are situated have passed through at one time or another. Just imagine, if you will, someone making a demand on the British government that they must close down the BBC and all its works. The other demands are, in a way, tucked away, but arguably more important. That is, that Qatar must break relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran and must shun military cooperation with Erdogan's Turkey. Both of these demands lead into wider avenues. The supposed support of Qatar for the Palestinian resistance, Hamas, although frankly, I don't myself, over more than 40 years of involvement in that struggle, haven't seen much actual support from Qatar to the Palestinian resistance, but whatever there is has to be ended. And the breach with Iran, well, of course, they would say that, wouldn't they? Because Saudi Arabia already has problems inside the GCC in relation to its policy of confrontation and maybe even ultimately war with Iran. Oman and Kuwait have been a little bit indisciplined from the Saudi point of view and have not been prepared to, with sufficient gusto, pursue an anti-Iranian policy. And so it seems to me that the Saudi dictatorship is seeking to punish Qatar on these grounds, but not just Qatar, to make sure that all the ducklings of the GCC follow the mother goose wherever that mother wants to go. There are other demands which may or may not have some legitimacy, but even insofar as they do, they are the pot calling the kettle black, as we say in English, when both, of course, are burned and blackened, or rather both have been burning and blackening other people. The charge that Qatar has been supporting terrorism is, from my point of view, correct. But Saudi Arabia has been supporting exactly the same terrorism, only to an even greater extent. Qatar is jointly culpable for the destruction of Iraq, for the destruction of Libya, for the destruction of Yemen, for the destruction of Syria. Both of them have been involved up to their neck in the blood that has been shed in those places. And so for Saudi Arabia to make demands on Qatar that it should cease and desist in such destructive practices seems a little, well, as we say in English, a little bit cheeky, if that's not too jocular a word for such a very serious matter. It's also true that whilst Saudi Arabia regards the Muslim Brotherhood as probably its number one or maybe number two enemy, that Qatar is the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, at least financially. This was shown most vividly in the overthrow of President Morsi in Egypt, which Qatar strongly opposed and which the Saudis, well, frankly, paid for and helped to organize. And so the presence in Qatar of leading figures in the Muslim Brotherhood is an affront to the Saudi and UAE attitude to the Muslim Brotherhood. It's true that there are many important religious and political figures in exile in Doha, not least the leader of Hamas, who spent some decades in Damascus before breaking with the Syrian regime and taking off to a place that, well, frankly, would never have had anything to do with them in previous years. And it's true that Saudi Arabia, with its newly warming relations with Israel, doesn't want to see the success of the Palestinian resistance, because that would cut across its change of direction vis-a-vis the Zionist settler state. It's also true, and Arabs know this better than me, that there is a very considerable power struggle inside Saudi Arabia going on. The crown prince has just been overthrown by a 30-year-old man who's now the crown prince and is effectively the king, and in the normal course of time and events will become now the king of Saudi Arabia. He is the man who has unleashed a series of destabilizing, aggressive moves in the region. And there's resistance in Saudi Arabia to these changes, not just in the royal family, but amongst the tribes, for example. The rulers of Qatar have quite deep relations with some of the minority tribes, but big minority tribes inside Saudi Arabia itself. And the last point from me, and I'm really only sketching the background to this, is that Saudi Arabia doesn't really accept that Qatar should be an independent state in the first place, or for that matter, any of the other small satrapies in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia, itself a creation of imperial power in the Sykes-Picot era, regards these new kids on the block who only became countries, states, independent countries in the 1970s as really something that has been taken from them, not least the oil and gas under the desert sands in those countries. So what's going to happen now? Well, if you give someone a 13-point ultimatum of such magnitude and sweep and give them just 10 days to implement it, and they tell you to get lost, which presumably in terms what Qatar is going to do, unless it's going to abolish itself as an independent sovereign country, well, what do you do next? You're going to pretend you didn't give them 10 days? You're going to extend the 10 days to 10,000 days? Or are you going to take action? I personally believe, though some of my closest friends in the Middle East don't agree, it's only fair to point that out, I personally believe there will be war. I don't believe that you can make such demands, have them thrown back in your teeth, and then do nothing about it. And they've already got sanctions on Qatar. They've already got a blockade on Qatar. Even camels are dying in the desert heat because they can't get across the border. Milk is being flown in, shipped in. There's already something close to an emergency in Qatar under this blockade. They've already broken diplomatic relations to all material purposes. So the only thing that's left is military action, short of a palace coup taking place in Doha, which of course can never be ruled out when you have royal families with big courts. There could be someone will step forward to overthrow the current dispensation in Doha. That's possible, but unlikely. And that means, for me, war. It means that Saudi Arabia, a Western satrapy, is going to have a war with Qatar, another Western satrapy. You couldn't make it up. It's a kind of satire, but it's real and it's happening right now. Who's going to respond first? Yes, sir.
Thank you, George. My name's Julian, and you mentioned Hamas there. It's been said before, sometimes countries are punished not for the bad they've done, but for the only good thing they've done. I never thought I'd feel sorry for Qatar. If this is a war, as you say it will be in 10 days, will it be a war between two sides, or is it going to be a Saudi invasion of Qatar?
Well, I think the latter. A Saudi invasion is the more likely military maneuver. But whether it will only be between those two, or three, because the UAE will presumably also send forces, I very much doubt. Because Qatar has strong relations with Turkey. It has relations with Iran. That charge is true. And also Russia is now a firmly established player in Middle East politics. Hallelujah, from my point of view. And so whether they can isolate it to a small local war is very much in doubt.
Where do we protest it? Where's the Saudi embassy?
Well, the Saudi embassy, which I have stood outside protesting many times with Professor Al-Masri, who is here with us in the audience. But it's very difficult for somebody like me, and I infer for someone like you. If I'm demonstrating against Saudi Arabia, I'm certainly not demonstrating for Qatar.
Henry Kissinger said it's a shame they both can't lose.
Well, that phrase or quotation has been in my mind quite a lot over the last few days. Professor, would you like to kick off as a leading figure in the Saudi opposition?
Yes, thank you very much, George. Concerning invading Qatar and so on, I think this is maybe a pessimistic view, because the Saudi army is not qualified to do this job, especially with the American base there and the Turkish army contingents, which are small but very symbolic. And the experience with the Saudi land force is very negative. Mohammed bin Salman did not dare putting them in Yemen because he knows he will be involved in something like a Vietnam war, in a mountain war like Afghanistan. Number one. Secondly, they are not very well equipped and not well trained. Thirdly, if they get defeated...
Can I stop you there? When you say they're not very well equipped, they have spent trillions of dollars on
Yeah,
equipment.
But I tell you where the equipment are. The equipment are sold in high seas to various countries, and the money is it's a money recycling scheme
Okay,
to,
okay.
to get commissions up to 50-70%. There is barely any equipment. Evidence for that, I have the underground connections. They took from the National Guard ammunition in the south because they ran out of ammunition. So that's the whole equipment. Thirdly, if they get defeated, which is certain in Yemen, that's the reason in Yemen, then the disgruntled military may go back and make a coup d'etat. There will be nothing anymore to lose after you see your comrades being killed and so on, and the situation miserable. In Qatar, it's not very likely because, interestingly, in America, there is a deep split in the administration. The usual two factions, the newcons, the globalist, and the military-industrial complex, have added a third unit, or third faction, which is a smaller faction, but headed by a populist Trump. Whatever an idiot he may be, he's a populist. He came on a populist wave, and he's adopted by certain Zionist circles. So we have three camps fighting now, trying to impeach each other. They are busy with themselves. And the foreign ministry and the defense ministry have made clear that they on the side of Qatar, and they sent even ships to do training with Qatar. So invasion is not possible. So I think this whole thing is focused essentially on an invasion in Gaza. So don't expect when the program airs that Qatar will be invaded. Expect that Gaza will be invaded. That's my expectation. Secondly, a side note, most likely the king will abdicate and go for medical treatment, and we have a very young, foolish Alexander the Great. That's the way he calls himself, but it's true. What the Economist wrote, that he loves to be called by his inner circle Alexander the Great. In Arabic, it's Iskandar Akbar. We say in Twitter, Iskandar Ahbal, the foolish Alexander. And that's both very bad. But I don't want to take...
No, but that's a very interesting take.
So expect invasion in which... And also,
Well, let me press you then on that. And I bow to your superior knowledge of your own country. But you get my point. If I give you 13 swinging demands with a 10-day deadline and you don't comply with any of them, don't I look like the fool, the weak, if nothing then happens?
It would be if you are, let us say, if you are like a respectable leader of a respectable country. But these are like almost like mafia gangster. He will be able, he has a complete army of people tweeting and so on, and unfortunately journalists who will blabber around and explain to a great wisdom that he did not start a war against his brethren, etc. Well, they are ready in the internet for that. He will find an excuse. By the way, for example, you mentioned that Qatar is having good relation with Iran, relatively. What about Emirates, who have trade relation going into 30-40 billions yearly? Actually, the Qatari demands, I have the Qatari alleged country counter demands. One of the first demands that the Emirates should scale down its business with Iran from 30 billion to 5 billion a year.
So why is the UAE going along with this demand on Qatar when they themselves have more business, more relations with Iran?
That's just playing the sectarian card in the consciousness of the simple-minded Saudi and the area, because they have played the sectarian card, the anti-Shia card, since Khomeini came, and it worked successfully, quite successful for them, and they are deeply stuck in it. That's their main argument. In reality, the king just received the delegation from Iraq, which is obviously fully with Iran in the issues going on in Iraq, etc. So this is just to fool the common man. The reality is that definitely Saudi Arabia does not like Iran, and they're afraid of Iran because the Iranian model being declared Islamically, and Saudi Arabia declaring itself Islamically, true or not, we are not going. That's what they present themselves to the world, is a challenging model for Saudi Arabia. There are elections, there's a parliament, there are a margin of freedom there, which Saudi Arabia cannot tolerate. It will disintegrate this way. So they have to fight Iran, and they have to find some kind of philosophical and ideological reasons, anti-Sahaba, anti-Islamic history, etc. That's only a pretext. The real for Saudi Arabia is keeping power and being absolute ruler, nobody challenging them. That's what they want, and nothing else. That's the main thing there. For that, only some United States, and initially Britain, which established them, created them ex nihilo. They did not exist. Abdulaziz was sent by Britain from Kuwait. Thank you, Britain, for sending this guy. Please take him back if you can. Anyway, he's dead. Take his sons back. We don't want them. Then America adopted them because Britain actually ditched them to America before the Second World War, saying, listen, this guy is asking for a salary every month for £20,000. At the time, pound was valuable, was gold pound. And we don't have money for it. We are busy with Europe and busy fighting Hitler. So please, America, take him over and get all the oil if there's any oil. The British thought at the time there was no oil because all exploration ended in nothing.
Another British ruling class success story, this, isn't it?
A mistake of the British. And the British thought we have the oil of Iraq and oil of Iran. We don't need to bother about Arabia, which is barren. It turns out to be the biggest success for the Americans ever that they took over Saudi Arabia.
Well, look, on one level, we could finish the program now because I put my thesis. It's been rather convincingly rebutted by the good professor with whom I worked 30 years ago, it feels like now. He's still in exile. I hope one day he can return. But there may be others in the audience who have a contrary point of view, and we'll turn to that after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing the Gulf, in particular the crisis with Qatar and some, at least, of the other members of the GCC. We took the كلمة camera onto the streets of London to see what the British people thought of it all, if indeed they've thought of it at all. Take a look at this.
Will the isolation on Qatar reduce terrorism?
Yeah, I wouldn't say 100%, but 50%, yeah. But it wouldn't change that quick. It'll take time. It'll just for everything to reduce.
لا ما أشوف هالشكل. هذه يضعفون العرب. زين وهذه مو من صالح العرب ولا من صالح المسلمين.
It's almost like in the U.S. where we've had this war on drugs for how long and hasn't cut it. And I don't know if there'll ever be an end to ISIS. I know what they all say, but I'm sorry. I got a feeling they might get reduced, but I don't think it'll ever end.
The isolation, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a slap on the hand, basically, to show the Qatari government that, you know, there is pressure being put on the Gulf states, on the other Gulf states, to sort of clamp down on terror finance.
Do you think the isolation on Qatar will reduce terrorism?
لا ما أعتقد. الإرهاب ظاهرة دولية، هاي ما لها علاقة بفلان بلد وفلان بلد. أكو أدوار يلعبها كل حاكم بالمنطقة وحتى في كل العالم، وما يقدر يقول لا للقوى العظمى اللي تتحكم بمصير البشرية نحو الأسوأ. فما أعتقد أبدا الإرهاب ما له علاقة بقطر.
What perturbed me about these vox pops that we just watched was how the non-Arab speakers would appear to have bought the premise that somehow Qatar is the reason why there's an international terrorist phenomenon, when I had thought that there was a significant extent to which it had been established in the public mind that Saudi Arabia was the head of the terrorist monster, the fountainhead, the financial, ideological, theological fountainhead of it. But it just shows you a little bit of propaganda, and you can convince some of the people, some of the time, that actually it's not them. Look over there. It's tiny Qatar that's responsible for it. Sir, please, you have the floor.
دكتور أديب زيادة، باحث في العلاقات الدولية. أنا أحب هنا أن أضع الأمور في سياقها. الإشكالية حقيقة وقعت ما بين دول السعودية والإمارات وقطر من جانب آخر منذ العام 2011 مع انطلاقة الربيع العربي. أعتقد مع انطلاقة الربيع العربي كان هناك يعني توجهات لكلا الطرفين، السعودية والإمارات أخذت منحى في معادي جدا للربيع العربي وثورات الربيع العربي، وبالتالي أخذت كل إجراء ممكن ودفعت الأموال الكثيرة من أجل وجود وخلق ثورات مضادة للثورات العربية لكسر هذه الردة العربية وكسر الشعوب العربية مخافة انتقال الربيع العربي لتلك الدول. قطر من الواضح أنه منذ العام 2011 اتخذت موقفا آخر، هي وقفت إلى جانب كثير من الشعوب العربية تحديدا في مصر، في تونس، في ليبيا، في غيرها من الدول، وقفت إلى جانبهم في دعم مطالبهم بالحرية والتعبير عن إرادتهم بشكل مستقل وبشكل حر. من الواضح أنه كلا الطرفين وكلا التوجهين اصطدما، ولا يمكن للسعودية أن تحتمل هذا الأمر إلى أبعد مدى. رأينا أنه صبرت السعودية إلى حتى 2013 إلى حين تم إقصاء محمد مرسي عبر انقلاب عسكري في مصر في العام 2013، وبعد ذلك استمرت الجزيرة واستمرت قطر في تبني الثوار وتبني موقف القائمين على الربيع العربي آنذاك، وتبني رواية الإخوان المسلمين ومن صف إلى صفهم في ذاك الوقت. ولذلك عبر عن هذا الرفض في العام 2014 تم سحب السفراء من قبل الإمارات والسعودية من قطر، وتدخلت الكويت، وبعد فترة من الزمن تقريبا أشهر قليلة وعادت الأمور إلى ما جريه، بعد ما أن قدمت قطر بعض التنازلات للسعودية تمثلت في طرد ربما أو على الأقل طلب من مجموعة من ممثلي الإخوان المسلمين بالانتقال من قطر إلى دولة أخرى، وقلصوا ربما من المعروض في الميديا من قبل الجزيرة آنذاك ربما ضد دول تحديدا ضد مصر ودول أخرى في الخليج. لذلك أعتقد المشكلة حقيقة هي في جوهر توجه كلا الطرفين. الآن قطر بتبنيها للربيع العربي وتبنيها لمن تمخض عنه الربيع العربي من الإخوان المسلمين والفصائل الحرة التي تنادي بالحرية في المنطقة، وتبنيها لحركة حماس من جانب آخر. أعتقد أنها وضعت نفسها في مأزق كبير أمام هذا التوجه بين قوسين الذي ينافي الحريات ويرفض إعطاء الشعوب حقها في التعبير عن ذاتها. لذلك الآن قبل فقط لسه يعني أسبوعين أو 3 أو 4 أيام أفصح هؤلاء الناس عن مطالبهم. يعني شهر كامل تقريبا الأزمة إلى من 5/6 لحد الآن تقريبا أسبوعين كاملات لم يبدوا ولم يفصحوا عن مطالبهم، فقط قبيل يومين فقط أفصحوا عن مطالبهم. وكما يتضح من مطالبهم أنه المطلب الأساسي في الموضوع هو وقف قناة الجزيرة عن البث، لأنهم يعتقدون تمام الاعتقاد بأنه ما دام هذا الصوت موجود، ما دام هناك تأثير على الفكر العربي وفكر الشعوب العربية باتجاه المطالبة والاستمرار في المطالبة بالثورات العربية والاستمرار في المطالبة بحقهم في التعبير عن أنفسهم. وفي المقابل أيضا يريدون في ذات الوقت إرضاء لأمريكا حتى تصطف أمريكا إلى جانبهم، يريدون أيضا أن يطبعوا العلاقات مع إسرائيل. وتطبيع العلاقات مع إسرائيل من الواضح أنه جاء بالرغم من المبادرة العربية في العام 2002 وتجاوزا لها، وحتى تجاوزا للموضوع الفلسطيني ككل. هم الآن مستعدون لإبداء علاقات وبناء علاقات اقتصادية مع إسرائيل والقفز نحو التطبيع دون حل القضية الفلسطينية. ولذلك يريدون حتى الصوت المنافي والرافض لهذا المنطق اللي هي حركة حماس الآن أن تسكت وأن تخرس. الآن الإسكات والإخراس لحركة حماس يتم من تخلي الآن ما يسمى بين قوسين الراعي لحركة حماس هو في قطر. ولذلك هم أحد مطالبهم الرئيسية في المطالب أمس وتسليم الإرهابيين الموجودين على قائمة الإمارات والسعودية والإرهابيين الموجودين على القائمة الأمريكية أيضا، الأمريكية بمعنى حركة حماس. ولذلك أعتقد المشكلة هي مشكلة في جذر المشكلة أساسها صراع على من يقف مع الحريات ومن يرفض.
I have to ask you to stop. Thank you. That was a very significant contribution. I can't let everyone speak for so long. So please, yes sir.
شكرا جورج. يوجد في المنطقة مولود مشوه اسمه الإرهاب. الجميع يقول إن هذا ابن سفاح، الجميع يقول أنه ليس ابني، لكن 3 فقط قادرين على ولادة هذا المولود المشوه: السعودية ومحور الإخوان المسلمين وإيران. لأنهم يتبنون فكر أيديولوجيا جهادية وثورية. السعودية تتبنى الوهابية في داخل المملكة كعقيدة، وتحارب، وهذا قضية قديمة، تحارب أي حركة وهابية أيديولوجية في داخل المملكة. نعم، ممكن أن تدعم حركات وهابية ذات توجهات أيديولوجية خارج المملكة مثل ما دعمت في أفغانستان، لكن من المحال أن تقبل السعودية بوهابية أيديولوجية في داخل المملكة. الوهابية السعودية هي وهابية عقائدية دينية متعصبة متطرفة، نعم، إلا أنها عقائدية لا تملك أيديولوجيا للدولة. خارج المملكة يوجد لدينا زواج غير شرعي بين الإخوان المسلمين والفكر القطبي وبين الوهابية، ربما له جذور في أفغانستان لما التقى عبد الله عزام مع أيمن الظواهري مع أسامة بن لادن، وأحدثوا هذا الميكس، وهابية أسامة بن لادن السلفية مع أيمن الظواهر وعبد الله عزام الإخوانيين، وبدأت تتفرع، يعني بدأت تتطور هاي المدرسة. فرخوا جنين خطير جدا في العراق اللي هو أبو بكر البغدادي. أبو بكر البغدادي هو مولود متطور عن أبو مصعب الزرقاوي الذي ابتدع فكرة الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام. هذا الميكس داعش هو عبارة عن مولود مشوه ناتج عن زواج غير شرعي بين الوهابية والإخوان. اليوم ملامح انتصارات الجيش العراقي والحشد الشعبي وأبناء العراق على داعش في العراق بدأت تأخذ أبعادها وانعكاساتها. تفضل الأستاذ عن صراع السعودية إمارات مع قطر في الربيع العربي. نعم، لأنه توصيف الربيع العربي لم نتفق عليه. هل هو ربيع كما أراد له الشباب الديمقراطيين في مصر وسوريا وفي ليبيا وفي تونس وغيرها من الدول العربية، أم هو خريف إخواني يريد إقامة خلافة إسلامية تقوم على قتل الشعوب وتقوم على فرض عقائد دينية على هذه البلدان؟ لم نتفق على المصطلح الربيع العربي. السعودية تخشى من الإخوان لسبب بسيط، الإخوان هم العدو الضد النوعي للفلسفة الأيديولوجيا القائمة عليها السعودية. هنا عندنا الآن محور جديد تشكل. قطر اللي هي صديقة لإسرائيل صار يتحدثون عن قطر عدوة إسرائيل. الجزيرة التي منذ أكثر من 14 سنة تروج لقتل العراقيين الشيعة والسنة والمسيحيين، وتسمينا بالقتلى، وتسمي داعش بالثوار، وتسميهم بالمجاهدين، وتسميهم خلافة إسلامية، وتجري استفتاءات واستبيانات تسمي انتصارات جنود الخلافة الإسلامية على ميليشيات الشيعية في العراق، ويحصل استفتائها على أكثر من 80% من مصوتي الإخوان ومحبي الجزيرة اللي اليوم يتحدثون عن ديمقراطية. الجزيرة قناة إرهابية، الإخوان المسلمين إرهابيون، الوهابيون المرتبطون بفكرة الخلافة الإسلامية إرهابيون. لست بصدد الدفاع عن السعودية، ولكني أقول إذا كانت السعودية اليوم تقول أريد أن أغير، أنتج سعودية جديدة، سعودية محمد بن سلمان، جيل جديد خلاف الجيل القديم من السعوديين من آل سعود، أنا مضطر أن أتفاهم مع هذه المملكة الجديدة. تتحالف مع ترامب جاء برؤية مختلفة عن رؤية هيلاري كلينتون وأوباما التي دعمت الإخوان المسلمين والجماعات التوسع جماعات الإسلامية في منطقتنا وتسببت بدمار منطقتنا. الآن يتشكل محور واضح، الخيط السري التركي الأردوغاني والقطري الإخواني وإيران. الحبل السري اللي يجمع هؤلاء هو فكرة الخلافة الإسلامية والأيديولوجيا الثورية. الآن بتصور الشخصي ستنقسم المنطقة باتجاه مجموعة الثوريين والأيديولوجيين اللي تشكل حماس والإخوان المسلمين والجماعات المتطرفة والإرهابية وحزب الله والميليشيات الشيعية بالعراق، إضافة إلى قطر وتركيا ومن يصطف إلى جانبهم. Thank you.
Okay, Professor, let me ask you a couple of questions arising from both of these heavyweight contributions. First of all, aren't the Qataris also Wahhabi? Aren't they arguing that they are actually better Wahhabis than the Al Saud are?
More or less, there's a problem with all these terms without clear specifying what can be said. First of all, I would like to say that the analysis here, I disagree fully with the analysis. Al-Zarqawi was originally in prison. He's from the group of Al-Maqdisi, who was in prison in Jordan. Then he went to Afghanistan. He had extreme views. He declared all Taliban to be kafir, disbeliever, except maybe Mullah Omar. Why he accepted Mullah is not clear. He came back to Iraq. Those in Jordanian prison, and the Jordanian condition is so that they are all of them depenetrated by the Jordanian intelligence. Don't omit the intelligence services in this affair. I'm not saying that they move everything, but they have a contribution in investing on the people's grievances, beliefs, misguided beliefs, which can be directed in a certain direction. So the Al-Zarqawi organization was originally penetrated by the Jordanian intelligence. If we say Jordanian intelligence, we the local branch of the MI6. Thank you, Britain, again. Okay? So that's it. And then we were following that on a daily basis. I don't know if the brother was following that on a daily basis, like we're following in our broadcast at the time and after that, and communicating with the people in the underground. Slowly, he was penetrated also, his organization, with the Iranian intelligence, with the objective to commit atrocities against the Shia in Iraq so that they will move into the embrace of Iran. Because the Shia of Iraq never acknowledged Iran as the Shia leadership. The Shia leadership should be in Najaf, not Qom. But they moved them toward Qom, toward Wilayat al-Faqih. For good or bad, I'm not just describing history. Then later on, the Ba'ath Party was able to deeply penetrate, and this is well established. We have in communication with some Ba'ath Party leader from Iraqi persuasion, not the Syrian persuasion, who was in contact with us as a Islamic Renewal Party. And we asked him frankly, he was hesitating at the time after the beginning of the Al-Arabi, the Arabic Spring, what they call Arabic Spring, which direction he should take. He was disappointed about what's going on, and asked him, there is a rumor, we asked obviously in a roundabout way, there is a rumor that you have penetrated and controlled Daesh, that you are controlling Daesh. The Iraqi Ba'ath Party is controlling Daesh. Say, who told you that? Daesh is the Iraqi Ba'ath Party. It is our party in another embracement. The foot soldiers are idiotic Wahhabis, which we can use them as donkeys, who are ready to sacrifice themselves in martyrdom operation. And this is through our contacts. So this is not Saudi Arabia. It's a very complicated situation.
It's sounding more and more complicated.
It's more complicated, and it goes to historic roots longer than people think. I just remind
it's probably a good time to take a break. You're watching كلمة on Al Mayadeen Television with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London, discussing the crisis with Qatar and some of its erstwhile allies in the GCC. Professor Masri, I want to ask you a second question, if I may. It's undoubtedly true that Qatar itself has secret, more or less public actually, relations with Israel. The last time, maybe the only time, if I recall, that I was in Doha, I was in a hotel, the lift doors open, and out came Shimon Peres, the president of Israel, in an Arab Gulf country.
And this is public.
So it's if it wasn't openly public, it was certainly semi-public that he was there. At the same time, We have to be fair and balanced, like Fox News. Hamas is headquartered in Doha. No other Arab country would have accepted Khalid Mashal and the other leaders of Hamas. So at least you can say for Qatar that they may be waltzing with Israel, but they haven't entirely broken with the Palestinian struggle. Is that then, is the achievement of that one of the main goals of this? Is that your point?
No, what I suggest is that what happened really with Qatar, when Britain vacated the Gulf in the late 60s, early 70s, Saudi Arabia was firmly in the American camp. And Britain, the special friend of America, would stab in the back as usual. We know that, you know that. You are in the British politics, you know more than we know about that. But you may not be able to say it publicly. So they constructed the so-called Emirate, so that that Emirate will be a bulwark against Saudi Arabia and against the Americans. And also Oman is firmly in the British, and now with the globalization camp, the European camp, let's call it. So, and Qatar was given its independence, I think, a little bit later, if I remember correctly, because it was separated physically, and it was a small, tiny entity, and the Saudis were willing to snatch it any time they can. So Qatar is a small entity. The grandfather of the current ruler was a man who was keeping the state budget in his own account in London here, in his name. When his son, Khalifa, Hamad bin Khalifa, made the palace coup and removed him in the early 90s, after I came here in London, there was a conflict starting with Saudi Arabia immediately, because he filed a lawsuit against his father here in London to get the budget transferred to a state account, as it should be in a modern state. Does not mean that Hamad bin Khalifa is a super democrat or an excellent personality, but definitely he lives in the 20th century, where his father and King Abdullah, or Crown Prince Abdullah at the time, they're living in the time of Henry VIII, in the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages. So King Abdullah was outraged and approached Hamad saying, I promise you that the money will come, etc., but cease with this lawsuit. And they made a very complicated contract, which Qatar will never be able to sue the father again, and they withdrew their lawsuit, the case, and they will never be able to file. The result of that is that they didn't get the money because Abdullah betrayed them. And there were plans to invade Qatar. We were aware about that, and we informed the Qatari. So Qatar took refuge, where to take refuge in this wide world, except to America. So they invited the American base. And what is the closest to the stomach of the American, rather than through the kitchen of Israel? So they started relation with Israel. So they are forced. That's not defending Qatar. I would never have done that. I would prefer to go into exile, but I am Mohammed al-Mas'ari, and this is Hamad bin Khalifa. Two different persons with two different decisions. I would have abolished the country and went. I would never do that, but he did that, thinking this way he will save the entity as Qatar and it was his own kingdom. Is that out of matter of belief and principle? I don't think he believes that's the right way of doing things. And we had once with him personally a communication that we will never accept that, myself and Dr. Sa'al Faqih, and we will criticize that. So you criticize as much as you like. We believe we have a case that we are under duress. We have no other way. So it is not, the relation with Israel is not out of love Israel. In the contradistinction that the sacred relation of Saudi Arabia with Israel is much deeper than you think. King Salman himself is an arch-Zionist, and his son Mohammed bin Salman is an arch-Zionist. He is more Zionist than even, almost as Zionist as Trump. And they believe they cannot survive and keep this power except with the Zionist approval and Zionist. So that's not the reason. Now, just a historic point of terrorism. You remember we read as children John Silver, the one-eyed pirates and so on. Who were the pirates and pirates? They were those who were fighting the British Empire. They were declared terrorists. And many of them are freedom fighters, but we remember them as terrorists. Nowadays, many who are fighting certain empires are declared terrorists. So if you fight me and I'm in power, I'm a world power, I declare you to be a terrorist. But if you gain power, one day, then you become a good man, like Nelson Mandela. So this matter of terrorism, we should, I think, this audience here of relatively sophisticated, advanced people, we should get out of that. We'll leave that for the simple man, the common man who may be fooled by the BBC, but not for us.
Let me take someone who hasn't spoken. Yes, Madame.
Thank you. My name is Merva Kansel. I would just like to make a little statement about Turkey's position in this crisis.
Say who you are.
I'm a political analyst.
Okay.
Yeah. When we look at Turkey's foreign policy in the Middle East, we remember that they came up with the idea of zero problem with the neighbors. However, we all see that it's failed in a very dramatic. Yeah, it's just turned
it was a
in
good
contrast.
Idea, it just didn't last.
Yeah. What Turkey wants in the Middle East, with a one word, we would be able to say that stability, because of its own domestic dynamics in the country. When Turkey wants to look at the Middle East, it just wants to see a stable situation which wouldn't affect the country itself because Turkey has Kurdish population in the country, and it wouldn't affect positively as Erdogan wants. So under his government, which is becoming more and more oppressive towards its own people, it's very ironic to see that Turkey is shipping milk to Qatar in this crisis, because the situation in the country is getting worse and worse every day.
In which country?
In Turkey. In Turkey, yeah. I mean, obviously,
but you're
each
not
country.
Yet short of milk.
No, thankfully. What Turkey wants in this crisis, where it situates itself in this chaos, they want to play a mediator role in this crisis. However, in the media, we can see that they're failing to portray and maintain this unbiased position in the crisis, because the President Erdogan just made a statement that this siege against Qatar is inhumane. It's kind of taking sides in this crisis, and NATO doesn't seem really happy about that. And Turkey needs to think a little more careful when taking position and maintaining this unbiased position. So we would like to maybe should ask more questions about what Turkey wants in this problem. It's more than milk, it's more than food supplies. They have 3,000 soldiers in Qatar. We can say that there is a growing relations between Turkey and Qatar in the recent years. Investments between two countries and the business people traveling. It's getting really and most important thing in Turkey nowadays, because Gulf investment is seen as a big resource. So yeah, it's much more than milk, as I can say.
Well, look, to paraphrase Mubarak, Qatar may be a tiny little shoebox, but it makes a lot of noise. Al Jazeera makes a lot of noise. The World Cup coming to Qatar is a big noise. Qatar owns 14% of London. Can you imagine? 14% of the skyline of London is owned by the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund and some individuals. Qatar has invested quite smartly, actually, in relations with, for example, Turkey. It's a big investor in Turkey, and now it's payback time. Qatar, if it is to be attacked, will require the military support of Turkey, and that will cause a problem inside NATO. But, as the professor said earlier, NATO is already split. The British, who picked this Qatari royal family and installed them, and who are beholden to them, but also beholden to the Saudis, are also obviously divided. The United States, the Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary is with Qatar, the President is with Saudi Arabia, at least at the time of recording. Anyone else who hasn't yet spoken? Doctor.
Thank you, George. James Thring, Ministry of Peace. I'm confused about the situation, but I resort to what I regard as the main power in the Middle East to explain what's happening. This crisis arose about 2 minutes after Mr. Trump left speaking to the Gulf Cooperation Council in Saudi Arabia. And one suspects that since he's advised by Mr. Jared Kushner as his principal foreign policy advisor about the Middle East, and who is, of course, as we know, wholly devoted to the Israeli state, that some kind of advice has been given to the Saudis to say, you've got to rein in the Qataris because they're sponsoring terrorism, turning a blind eye, of course, as you said, to the Saudi terrorism. Now, why does that make sense? Because I would suspect the Israelis are going to be discovered as being behind all these terrorist activities. It's not the Saudis against the Muslim Brotherhood and so on, or even against Iran, I don't believe. The chief beneficiary of all this, if you think through it, is Israel. They like to see, and they've said it in their plan that I mentioned many times before, they like to see their enemies fighting each other. And this is a good example of two powerful enemies in terms of money and gas supplies and so on, fighting each other, first of all, and then, of course, ramping up the fight between the Islamists on the Sunni side and the ones on the other side of the Gulf. That would be marvelous.
Well, look, just because someone is the prime beneficiary of something does not mean that it's them that's doing it.
No.
You have said what you said many times, and I have answered many times, exactly as I'm going to do now. The Muslims, frankly, don't need anyone to encourage them to kill each other, to murder each other,
well, they haven't
to
been
invade
doing
each other. They don't need it. They're more than capable of doing it, of their own volition.
But George,
Saudi Arabia is more than capable of invading Qatar. Qatar is more than capable of drowning Libya in blood. The Arabs as a whole are more than capable of murdering hundreds of thousands of people in Syria. Just because Israel benefits from it doesn't mean that it's Israel that's doing it.
But George,
More fool these Arabs who are doing it to please Israel.
Well,
Your problem is, any moment now you'll be pulling out one of your famous photocopies with photographs of Jews on it. Your problem is, you see everything through the prism of a conspiracy. But there doesn't need to be a conspiracy. The Arabs have been murdering each other for millennia.
well, I don't see that, George, if I may come back on you. Until the Zionist occupation of Palestine, there was very little fighting between the Arab countries. Iran hasn't attacked any country in 200 years.
Abdul Wahab was ISIS before ISIS, 200 years before ISIS, cutting off heads, slicing people's throats, eating their hearts. All of these things are ancient.
Yes, but this is tribal. I mean, it's not a big war on the scale that we're talking.
It's a big war according to the standards of the time, the abilities of the time.
And in any case,
anyway, people are bored of you and I arguing about these things.
Just a remark about Abdul Wahab. You said definitely it was ideologically and tribally motivated, but we should not forget that he was receiving weapons from the East India Company. Thank you, Britain, again. So it's not conspiracy, but there are interactions between the international.
Yes,
by the way, I just remind the sister here for some points she maybe have neglected, independent of Erdogan being good and bad, oppressive, not oppressive. There was a coup d'etat last year against an attempt against Erdogan, and we have now well-established information and sources that the Emirate was one of the main financiers and involved in this matter. So the matter is not...
They're all very contradictory, all these positions, and some of the British people here will be thoroughly bemused already. The Emirates has better relations with Iran than Qatar does. The Emirates is itself threatened existentially by Saudi requirements of hegemony and complete.
No, this has ceased at the moment because the agreement, the agreement in the recent years is that the Arab Peninsula should belong to three blocks: Yemen, slimmed down to the north; Oman should be swallowed by Emirates and also Qatar; Kuwait should go back to Iraq, and Bahrain should be swallowed by us, by Saudi Arabia. That's roughly the three things which are. And every politician there, how power greedy he may be, he doesn't think that he can take all of Arabia at one go. Nobody has such an aspiration yet. So that's what there. So the Emirate is a very important leading entity in the area because it's commercially very savvy, relatively savvy. It has excellent relation with Iran, and she convinced everyone, even in the Iran Gulf, in the early war when Saddam was fighting with Iran, with the Gulf countries approached Emirates and told them, you have trade with Iran going to the tens of, other times in the billions, while we are fighting and supporting. Say, no problem, I will have trade also with Iraq. You cannot trade, we are trader. We are willing to sell everyone, including our own mothers. You just shut up, and everyone shut up. That's agreed upon. This is a center for trading, a center for, sorry to say, prostitution, and a center for drug trading. They are the main trader for the drugs collected by the CIA in Afghanistan, going through Emirates, going through Mali. That's the reason why there was a war in Mali, going to Europe and America. The biggest drug trader in the world is the CIA. So war on drug, all this, we should not be so simple-minded. This is a well-established, and anyone dancing out of the line in South America will be punished by the CIA. Anyone cooperating is a nice guy. He's a nice drug trader. He's our drug trader.
Blimey, this is getting more and more complicated. We'll be right back. You're watching كلمة حرة on Al Mayadeen television. Now, we took the Al Mayadeen cameras onto the streets of London to ask the people there if they knew anything about this subject of the apparently imminent confrontation between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. This is what they said.
Where does Europe stand on the Gulf crisis?
ما لها مكان. إذا دخلت أوروبا هذه مو من صالح المسلمين ولا من صالح العرب. إذا دخل الإنجليز أو أوروبا دخلت بصورة عامة على دول الخليج، هذه مو من صالح العرب بتاتا. وهذه ضعف للعرب إذا كان العرب أخرجوا السعودية أو الإمارات أو البحرين أخرجوا عن قطر، هذه ضعف العرب والمسلمين كافة.
From what little bit I can see, I think the U.S. is doing a little more, but I can't say it without certainty.
I think Europeans probably have a much sounder sense of what their interests are in the Gulf than, say, the United States, and probably a much longer-term perspective on what should be happening there than the United States, that tends to behave sort of like an adolescent boy.
الاستثمارات القطرية بلندن كلش هواية، بينما في أمريكا مو كلش هواية. القطريين يستثمرون بأوروبا وبريطانيا، السعوديين يستثمرون بأمريكا، فأعتقد هي أساس الصراع، هي موضوع اقتصادي ليس إلا. فأتوقع أن أوروبا راح تكون بجانب قطر لأنه سياساتها الاقتصادية ومصالحها كلش كبيرة معهم.
Well, the main thing which will stick in my mind from those vox pops was the image of the United States as an adolescent boy, Donald Trump, 50 years earlier. But it is an interesting dichotomy, isn't it, that Qatar has most of its friends in Europe, and particularly in England, but also in France. They own football teams, they own multi-story buildings, they own our principal department store, and so on. How much will Europe and Britain be a factor in all this, in your opinion, Doctor?
Thank you very much. First of all, I believe that the Arab Spring was the cut-off point between the past and the present. And I believe that the Saudis were so much infuriated by the Arab Spring, and I believe that the Arab Spring was a genuine popular movement, and it wasn't staged by the Israelis or by the Americans. I think it is just that an anger by the people against these dictatorships and tyrants. This is number one. Saudi Arabia was totally different after the Arab Spring than before it. Imagine Saudi Arabia in 2011 encircled by Iraq change in the north, Syria revolution at the beginning before it was turned upside down, and then you have Egypt to the west, you have Yemen in the south, and you have Bahrain and Oman to the east, all engulfed in revolutions. Where would be the next place for the revolution? Saudi Arabia. So since then, they have become so much belligerent against everybody. And then we had the alliance with the Israelis and Americans and the British. I think these are the counter-revolution forces that came into real work against the people, the Arab people, generally the Arab people. And then the intensification of the terrorism. They used three major weapons against the awakening of the people: terrorism, sectarianism, extremism. These three were used effectively by the Saudis. Now, okay, Qatar were pawns in that, but they were not the main motivators of these things. As for the Saudis and the Qataris now, we could see, I believe, that there is rivalry between USA and Britain in the Gulf. And I think, especially after Trump came to power, he just went to Saudi Arabia and he swept all the money. Nothing is left. And Theresa May have been working hard to get this money, but nothing has been left. So I agree with one of the people on the street who said that Europe is more inclined towards Qatar, and while I believe that there is now an axis evolving: Qatar, Turkey, and Europe. Europe is slightly becoming different from the Americans with regards to involvement in the Middle East, because totally America is against any revolution, against any change, pro-Israel, pro-Israeli security, and that the Arab Spring would alter the balance of power in the region if it ever came to fruition. The first attempt that the Saudis tried was in their invasion of Bahrain in 2011. Nobody spoke. Nobody talked about it. It didn't see itself, the news didn't see through to the mainstream media. However, it emboldened them. And this is why later they attacked first Bahrain, then they went to Syria, then they went to Egypt, then they went to Yemen. And the war in Yemen for 2 years, and nobody is talking about it completely, as if nothing is happening, is a travesty, or whatever is the word. I believe that the Saudis are in desperate situation. The movement of history is not in their favor. I believe that another Arab revolution, another Arab Spring is in the making underneath the rubble, and it will come out. And this is why now they are seeing that the continuation of the alliance between Qatar, the Ikhwan, Al Jazeera, it may help in the future as they played in the past. I do not believe really that Ikhwan and ISIS are the same. Ikhwan are not the same as ISIS, and it is totally against the fact. So we should not really be so much ignorant about the facts. I think ISIS and terrorism is a tool in the hands of the Saudis. They will continue to use them. They use them effectively, strongly in Syria, in Iraq, and now and everywhere, wherever there is a possibility of democratic transformation. In Somalia, in Nigeria, everywhere they are, in Libya, of course. So I believe that terrorism is the main weapon of Saudis, and they will not give it up, whatever happens. And this smoke screen is only to, and by targeting to and directing the hands to Qatar, is only trying to deflect the real attention and the real sponsors. And Trump is in a problem because he has the JASTA law. The JASTA law clearly links Saudi Arabia to 9/11, and you cannot escape that fact. So I believe that there is a new realpolitik taking place in the Arab world and with Europe, and there is realignment of alliances. And what is happening between Qatar and Saudi Arabia is one episode of that and another manifestation of the rivalry of the big powers with regards to them in the Middle East, especially in the Gulf.
Fascinating. This gentleman here who hasn't spoken, go ahead, sir.
My name is Muhammad. I'm studying politics at university. Well, firstly, to say that, I'm not an expert, such as our Arab friends and experts here. I'm an amateur. I'm an aspiring analyst. But to be honest, everything that's said here today is so contradictory, so complicated that I'm not firmly on the Qatar side or firmly on the Saudi side, etc. So it's very complicated, to see which side is right or wrong. So, but I think what is true is that not to have any strange conspiracy theories, but I think that the US or the powers that be, for example, whoever they are, the West in general, I think partly they did plan it in a way. For example, we saw Trump's visits 2 weeks earlier, $350 billion deal, arms deal with the Saudis. Then a week later, I think it was a $12 billion deal of jets with Qatar. So the US itself isn't on one side. It's not on Saudi's side. It's not going all in on Saudi, on the surface perhaps, but at the same time, it's not going all in on Qatar. It's like it's funding them both for a bigger conflict. And I partly agree with you in the sense that I think that there will be a conflict, there will be a war. I don't know how big, but I have a feeling that there will be.
Well, it seems to me pretty difficult for it not to be, for no shots to be fired. It would otherwise make a mockery of the new Crown Prince that he issued such drastic ultimata, gave such a short time for resolution, and then when there was no capitulation by Qatar, just to say, oh well, shrug. It's very difficult for me to grasp that. Quickly from you and quickly from you.
أنا حقيقة أحب أن أعلق ربما عقلين على ما تفضل به زميلي هنا. يعني الخلطة التي تقدم بها في الحديث عن الوهابية وعن حماس الإخوان المسلمين وآيسيس وداعش وكله، ووضعها في خلطة واحدة، أنا لا أفهم لا منطقيا ولا عقليا ولا أكاديميا ولا طب ولا نظريا كيف يمكن تحليل هذه الخلطة. الخلطة هذه واضح أن هناك بالنسبة لنا في العالم العربي كما هناك اتجاهات في العالم العربي معادية للحرية العربية والحرية الشعوب العربية، واضح أن هناك أصوات تمثل هذا التيار هنا في هذه القاعة. لذلك أنا أقول بأنه ما تفضل به الأخ هو بعيد جدا عن الصواب، وهو يمثل للأسف رأي الطرف الآخر الذي يعادي الحريات. إذا لم تكن الديمقراطية التي تمثلت في العام 2012 بانتخاب جماعة الإخوان المسلمين في مصر، إن لم تكن هذه ديمقراطية وإن لم تكن هذه انتخابات حرة ونزيهة، فما الذي تريده؟ إذا لم تكن هذه الديمقراطية، إذا كنت معارض لنتائج الديمقراطية وأنت معادي لنتائجها إلا إذا فصلت على مزاجك، فهذا يعني أنه هذا ليس ديمقراطية. إذا كنا نحترم قواعد الديمقراطية علينا أن نحترم نتائج الديمقراطية. أما إذا أجت بالإخوان المسلمين أو أتت بسين أو صاد أو عين أو غين ونرفضها، هذه مسألة معناها انتقائية في الديمقراطية، هي عين الدكتاتورية التي يمثلها للأسف أعداء الشعوب العربية.
أولا الديمقراطية هي ذراعي الحرية وقدميها. الديمقراطية ليست كل شيء. إذا جاءت الديمقراطية لوحدها ممكن أن تأتي بأبي بكر البغدادي، وممكن أن تأتي بجميع الإرهابيين في عالم عربي طبع على التخلف والعنف والتطرف والإرهاب والإقصاء. نظرة أحادية. العالم العربي إذا ترك وخلي ونفسه ممكن أن يصوت لأسامة بن لادن، واستفتاءات الجزيرة تصوت لأسامة بن لادن وللزرقاوي ولأيمن الظواهري ولأبو بكر البغدادي. أنا أحارب هذه الديمقراطية. لو سمحت أنا أقاتل كفارس عراقي. لو سمحت ضوضاء، ضجيج وفوضى عربية يراد أن تنتجون عقل عربي مفرغ من الإيمان. أنا عدو لديمقراطيتكم، أنا عدو لهذا التخلف والإرهاب. أنا عربي عراقي أقاتل أي ديمقراطية تأتيني برؤى أحادية إرهابية. نحن نؤمن بالديمقراطية إذا جاءت ضمن جسد متكامل، روح وعقل ليبرالية، تؤمن بالحرية، تؤمن بالسوق الحر، تؤمن بحقوق الإنسان، تؤمن بالعدالة الاجتماعية، تؤمن بالعدالة الانتقالية، تؤمن بالأقليات، تؤمن بالمساواة مع المرأة. إن لم تؤمن بكل ذلك تعسن لها من ديمقراطية. هذا أولا. اثنين، بالنسبة إلى المكس اللي قال عنه هو كلام غير أكاديمي وغير علمي، راجع جميع الدراسات والأبحاث المتخصصة بداعش والقاعدة وغيرها من الجماعات الجهادية الإرهابية. كل الدراسات تثبت، ربما يأيدني البروفيسور، أن الجماعات الجهادية عقيدة وهابية سلفية، ولكنها بأيديولوجيا قطبية إخوانية. وهذه تثبتها جميع الدراسات، أن داعش عقيدة وهابية سلفية، ولكنها أيديولوجيا قطبية إخوانية.
Well, democracy is the worst form of government, apart from all the others, as Mr. Churchill famously said. Professor, the last words are yours. Will this be peacefully resolved between Saudi Arabia and Qatar?
I don't think there will be an invasion. So the Saudi army is not capable of that, and the military American base will resist any attempt like that. And also the Turkish. But there will be invasion of Hamas. Let us wait and see. Hopefully it will not happen until the next broadcast, but it may happen quite soon.
Expect the unexpected here on كلمة on Al Mayadeen Television. I've been George Galloway. You've been a wonderful audience, and I hope you all enjoyed this show.